Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the second lesson for the module for this week. Now, this is the lesson that everybody's going to do on their own at home, both hybrid students and online students, all right? And this lesson is going to focus on two things: labor unions and some key strikes, okay? Now, these notes I would suggest taking on your own. Very, very easy, not a lot of material to go through. So I would just jot these down on a sheet of paper, okay? And use them to prepare for the little quiz that's going to accompany this lesson. Remember, the quiz is not open notes. So let's review what we talked about concerning labor unions from the last lesson, okay? A labor union is simply a group of workers, all right? When workers organize to get better pay and working conditions, they form labor unions. All right. And we talked about that in the last lesson, all these different things that are going on. We want better pay, shorter hours, no more child labor, women's suffrage and women's rights. We want all of these things. And so the workers are gathering together to fight for those things. And that's what a labor union is. So what we're going to look at today are three of the key labor unions that formed during this period of time. The first one, this is the oldest one. It's the Knights of Labor. It was founded in 1869 by Terence Powderly. Its main tool is something called arbitration. All right. They hope to settle disputes between labor and management with arbitration. Now, in the legal world, an arbiter is a lawyer. An arbiter also argues, okay? So it's kind of like collective bargaining. Both sides are going to sit down. They're going to argue their points back and forth and hopefully arrive at some sort of compromise, okay? Now, this is the oldest labor union, all right? It also has open membership, all right? Anybody can join the Knights of Labor, no matter what occupation they're in, okay? And that'll make more sense when we talk about the other two examples that we're going to mention today, okay? So anybody can join the Knights of Labor as long as you have a job, okay? Our second group, the American Federation of Labor, which was founded in 1886 by Samuel Gompers. These are the guys that are going to first use collective bargaining, okay, which is those negotiations between workers and management. Both workers and management sit down to work out a compromise, to work out a deal. Now, this union was closed to specific trades. Not everybody could join the American Federation of Labor. Only certain occupations, only certain jobs. Okay, so the Knights of Labor open to everybody. American Federation is closed except to certain occupations. Okay, the AFL is still around today. All right. It joined with another labor union, the CIO. So it's the AFL-CIO today, but it is still around today. The last union that we're going to talk about is the American Railway Union. It was founded in 1893 by Eugene Debs. Now, we're going to talk about Debs later on in the class. Debs actually leads the American Socialist Party. Okay, he's going to be an early proponent of socialism here in the United States. The American Railway Union is an industrial union. It is open to all rail workers, okay? So no matter what your job was on the railroad, you could join the American Railway Union, okay? If you were the conductor, if you were the guys loading the baggage, if you were the guys laying the track, okay, or guys building the cars, you could join the American Railway Union, okay? So anybody working for the railroad could join this union. So in a way, that's also a closed union because it's closed to anybody working on the railroad, okay? They're the only people that can join this. Now, it doesn't matter what your job is. As long as you're working for the railroad, you can join this union, all right? So there's our top three labor unions. Knights of Labor, 1869 by Terence Powderly, American Federation of Labor, 1886 by Samuel Gompers, and the American Railway Union, 1893 by Eugene Debs, okay? And no matter which union we're talking about, their main purpose is to fight for better pay and better working conditions for both workers and consumers, okay? I'm a big believer in labor unions. I think labor unions help protect workers. I think they help protect us as consumers. So I'm a big supporter of labor unions because and we'll talk more about this when we get to the progressive era. There were some businesses that were engaged in some pretty shady practices. And if it wasn't for the work of unions, those practices could have got out of hand and a lot of people got hurt. Okay. The last thing we're going to look at in this unit are three key strikes. Okay. We're going to talk about, and remember, a strike is a work stoppage. And the hope is that if the people agree to stop work, that will lead the owners and the workers to sit down and discuss working conditions. That's collective bargaining, and they will come up with a compromise that will lead to better conditions. That's the hope, okay? Unfortunately, the strikes that we're going to look at today aren't very successful, all right? And we'll talk about why in each individual situation. So we're going to talk about the Haymarket Square strike in Chicago, the Homestead strike in Pennsylvania, and the Pullman strike in Chicago. Now, all you have to do is copy down what is in the boxes. All right, and we'll talk about the cause, we'll talk about the events, and we'll talk about the effects. Then I'm going to give you a short summary of what actually happened and tie all the information together. Okay, so just copy down what you see in the chart, and then I will explain the story at the end just to give you a fuller picture of what's going on. Okay, so we're going to start with the Haymarket Square strike in Chicago. On May the 1st, 1886, thousands of workers mounted a national demonstration for an 8-hour workday, and strikes erupted in several cities. Now, sadly, often fights broke out between the strikers and strike breakers, okay, those that were trying to get in to actually do the work. Violence ensued. The police would show up, and then there would be conflict between the police and the strikers. Okay, so all this starts on May the 1st, 1886. It's a national movement, and it's for an 8-hour workday. Okay, now fast forward to May the 4th. Haymarket Squares in Chicago, a bunch of protesters had gathered. In the crowd were a group of anarchists. And of course, anarchists are opposed to any type of government. The anarchists were not part of the union. They were not part of the strike. They showed up to cause trouble. Okay? During the protest, a protester threw a bomb, okay, and it killed a policeman. Dozens of people, both protesters and policemen, were killed. 8 anarchists were tried for murder, and 4 were executed. The governor of Illinois decided that the evidence for convictions had been scanty and pardoned 3 of the 8 anarchists. A 4th had already committed suicide in jail. Okay, so you have this protest, these anarchists show up, a riot ensues, leaders are killed, and leaders are executed. Now, again, the anarchists were not part of the union and not part of the strike. They simply showed up to cause trouble. But sadly, what's going to happen is the union is going to get the blame. And the main union involved in this was the Knights of Labor. And with a policeman dying, with the riot breaking out, and other people getting killed, membership in the Knights of Labor is going to decline. Okay, the Haymarket riot left an unfortunate legacy. The Knights of Labor fizzled out as people shied away from radicalism. Employers became even more suspicious of union activities, associating them with violence. In general, much of the American public at the time came to share that view. Okay, so it started off with a good cause. We want an 8-hour workday. These anarchists show up who are not part of the union, but they show up, a bomb is thrown, panic ensues, a policeman is killed, other people are killed, and the Knights of Labor get the blame. Unions are going to take a hit, and union membership is going to decline. Now, the Homestead strike, okay? In the summer of 1892, a Carnegie steel plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania, cut workers' wages. The union immediately called for a strike. Andrew Carnegie's partner, Henry Frick, responded by bringing in the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons were a private police force, okay, known for their ability to break up strikes and also known for their ability to get information from people. The Pinkertons were founded by Allen Pinkerton. Allen Pinkerton was actually part of the security detail for President Lincoln, okay? In the ensuing strike, the Pinkertons kill several strikers and wound many others in a standoff that lasted about 2 weeks. Then on July 23rd, again, an anarchist who had joined the protesters tried to assassinate Mr. Frick. So again, not somebody who is protesting, not a part of the labor union. This anarchist shows up and tries to assassinate Mr. Frick. The union had not backed this plan, but the public associated the two. Again, people are going to assume the union is associated with this violence. It's not. But public opinion is going to turn against the union. The union called off the strike in November with people dying and with threats being made. The union calls off the strike in November. The Homestead strike was part of an epidemic of steel workers and miners' strikes that took place as the economic depression spread across America. In each case, troops and local militia were called in to suppress the unrest. Okay, so the Homestead strike started as a way to get better wages. Okay, Carnegie had cut wages. The people went on strike because they wanted better pay. That anarchist shows the Pinkerton Security Department or the Pinkerton Security Force is shown in or called in. People end up getting killed. Mr. Frick is threatened by an anarchist who is not part of the union, but people associate the union with this anarchist. And eventually, what happens is the strike is just called off. Once again, there's going to be no change in working conditions, no raise in wages. The unions are going to lose power because, again, people are going to associate the unions with this violence. All right. So, again, I said it before just a second ago. I'm a big believer in unions, but in these examples, what started off as a good crusade, okay, gets impacted by groups that are not part of the striking workers, and eventually the cause disintegrates, okay, and people are going to turn against unions. Right, which is sad. The last strike is the Pullman strike. Now, the Pullman strike takes place in Chicago. In 1893, the Pullman Palace Car Company, which produced luxury railroad cars, laid off workers and reduced wages by 25%. Inventor George Pullman, who owned the company, required workers to live in the company town near Chicago and controlled their rents and the prices of goods. In May 1894, workers sent a delegation to negotiate with Pullman. He responded by firing 3 workers and shutting down the plant. Okay, so Mr. Pullman is cutting wages by 25%, but making these people live in his company town and buy products from his company store, and those prices and those rents aren't decreasing. Okay. Desperate, the workers turned to the American Railway Union, because remember, anybody that works for the railroad can join the American Railway Union, led by Eugene Debs. Debs had begun work in a low-level railroad job while still a teenager, working his way up. He had condemned the railroad strike in 1877, which he said was a result of disorganization and corruption within the unions. Debs organized the ARW, American Railway Union, as an industrial union grouping all railroad workers together rather than separating them by jobs they held. He believed that industrial unions allowed groups to exert united pressure on employers. The ARU will call for a nationwide strike in June of 1894. By June of 1894, nearly 300,000 railway workers had walked off their jobs. The Pullman strike escalated, halting both railroad traffic and mail delivery. Railroad owners cited the Sherman Antitrust Act in an argument that the union was illegally disrupting free trade. On July 4th, President Grover Cleveland sent in federal troops ending the strike. When he refused the government's order to end the strike, Debs was imprisoned for conspiring against interstate commerce. Though Debs appealed the conviction, claiming that the government had no authority to halt the strike, the Supreme Court upheld it in the case of N. Ray Debs in 1895. Okay, so here's what happens with the Pullman strike. Wages are cut, people are laid off, but there is no decrease in the cost of living. Pullman is making these people live in his company town and buy goods from his company store, and those prices are not decreasing. About 300,000 people are involved in the strike. Eventually, okay, it spreads to all those who work on the railroad, which disrupts railroad traffic and mail delivery, prompting President Cleveland to send in federal troops to end the strike. And when the federal troops show up, everybody kind of backs down. Debs, who is the founder of the American Railway Union, ends up being arrested and imprisoned, and employers are going to use the courts to limit union activity. And once again, because it disrupts mail delivery, public opinion about the unions is going to decrease. Okay? Again, despite what we see in these 3 examples, I still say unions really help people get better conditions, okay, both for workers and consumers. All right. And when we get to the progressive era, I hope to talk a little bit more about that. All right. Double check this information. There's going to be a little quiz on these three strikes and those three unions. So be sure you look over things again before you take the quiz, as it is not open notes. Where we're headed next is we're going to talk about industrialization and its impact on African Americans and women.